The phone call that shattered Dean Martin's world came on March 21st, 1987, at 4:17 a.m. Dean was asleep in his Beverly Hills home when the ringing telephone pulled him from what would be his last peaceful sleep for the rest of his life. "Mr. Martin, this is the Riverside County Sheriff's Department. I'm sorry to inform you that there's been an aircraft accident involving your son." Dean's blood turned to ice. His son, Dean Paul Martin Jr., had been flying his F-4 Phantom II fighter jet on a routine training mission with the California Air National Guard. The plane had crashed into the San Bernardino Mountains during a snowstorm, and there were no survivors. Within hours, Frank Sinatra was at Dean's door, beginning what would become a desperate 3-year battle to save his best friend from a grief so profound it would ultimately claim Dean's career, his health, and his will to live. If you love discovering the untold stories behind music history's most incredible moments, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. March 21st, 1987, the day everything changed. Dean Paul Martin Jr. wasn't just Dean's son. He was his pride, his legacy, and his closest family relationship. Unlike many celebrity children who struggled with their famous parents' shadow, Dean Jr. had forged his own successful path as a professional tennis player and Air National Guard pilot. At 35 years old, Dean Jr. was everything his father had hoped for: responsible, accomplished, and genuinely devoted to serving his country. He had joined the California Air National Guard because he wanted to contribute something meaningful beyond his family's entertainment legacy. Dean Martin had always been known for his laid-back demeanor and casual approach to life. "That's life," was his signature phrase, delivered with a shrug that suggested nothing could shake him. But losing his son destroyed that carefully cultivated cool forever. The crash occurred during a routine training mission, when Dean Jr.'s F-4 Phantom II encountered severe weather conditions over the San Bernardino Mountains. Despite his extensive training and experience, the blizzard conditions made navigation impossible, and the aircraft went down in a remote, snow-covered area. Search and rescue teams spent days looking for survivors, but when they finally located the wreckage, they found that Dean Jr. and his weapons officer had been killed on impact. March 21st, 1987. Frank's response. Frank Sinatra received the news about Dean Jr.'s death while he was at his Palm Springs compound. Without hesitation, he canceled his evening plans and drove immediately to Dean's Beverly Hills home. Frank found Dean sitting in his living room, staring blankly at the wall, surrounded by family members who didn't know how to comfort him. Dean hadn't spoken since receiving the news, hadn't cried, hadn't reacted at all. He was in complete shock. "Dino," Frank said quietly, sitting beside his friend. "I'm here. Whatever you need, I'm here." Dean looked at Frank with eyes that seemed to have lost all their light. "He's gone, Pally. My boy is gone. I know. I'm so sorry. He was supposed to outlive me. That's how it works. Parents aren't supposed to bury their children." Frank had no words that could ease Dean's pain, so he simply stayed. For the next 72 hours, Frank remained at Dean's house, handling phone calls, managing visitors, and trying to shield his friend from the media circus that erupted around the tragedy. March 24th, 1987. The funeral. Dean Jr.'s funeral was held at St. Monica's Catholic Church in Santa Monica. Frank served as one of the pallbearers, along with Dean's other children and close family friends. During the service, Dean sat in the front pew, completely motionless. He didn't sing the hymns, didn't respond to the prayers, didn't react when the priest spoke about his son's life and service. He was physically present but emotionally absent, lost in a grief so deep it seemed to have disconnected him from the world around him. Frank watched his friend with growing concern. He had known Dean for over 40 years and had never seen him like this. Even during Dean's divorce from Jean, his lowest professional periods, and his various personal struggles, Dean had maintained his essential spark. Now that spark seemed to have been extinguished entirely. After the burial, Frank tried to get Dean to talk about his feelings, to express his grief, to begin the healing process. But Dean remained unreachable, locked in a silence that would last for months. April-December 1987. The vigil. Frank appointed himself as Dean's unofficial caretaker. visiting his friend several times a week, and trying every approach he could think of to help Dean process his loss. Frank brought Dean's favorite foods, thinking maybe appetite would return with proper nutrition. Dean wouldn't eat. Frank arranged for visits from mutual friends, hoping social interaction might help. Dean wouldn't engage. Frank even tried playing Dean's own recordings, thinking music might reach him when words couldn't. Dean asked him to turn it off. Frank was desperate, recalled Jilly Rizzo, who often accompanied Frank on these visits. He'd try everything: jokes, stories, memories of good times, anything to get a reaction. But Dean was just gone. Frank's concern deepened when he realized Dean had stopped taking care of himself entirely. Dean wasn't showering regularly, wasn't changing clothes, wasn't maintaining his famous grooming standards. The man who had once been Hollywood's epitome of cool sophistication was falling apart. Most troubling, Dean had stopped showing any interest in his career. He canceled upcoming performances without explanation, ignored calls from his manager, and refused to discuss any professional commitments. For someone whose identity had been built around entertaining others, this withdrawal was devastating. 1988, the reunion tour disaster. Frank's most ambitious attempt to help Dean came in early 1988, when he proposed a reunion tour featuring Frank, Dean, and Sammy Davis Jr. Frank believed that returning to performing might give Dean a sense of purpose and reconnect him with the joy music had always brought him. "Dean, we need you," Frank pleaded during one of his visits. "The music needs you. The people who love you need you. And Sammy and I need you." Dean initially refused, but Frank's persistence finally wore him down. Dean agreed to the tour, but Frank could see that his friend was only going through the motions to make Frank stop asking. The Together Again tour began in March 1988, and it quickly became apparent that Dean was not ready to return to performing. He seemed lost on stage, forgetting lyrics to songs he had performed thousands of times, missing cues, and showing none of his trademark charisma. After only 4 performances, Dean walked away from the tour without explanation. He simply failed to show up for a concert in Chicago, leaving Frank and Sammy to explain his absence to disappointed fans. Frank was heartbroken by Dean's departure, not because of the professional embarrassment, but because he realized his friend was beyond the reach of music, friendship, or any form of intervention he could provide. 1988, 1991. The decline. Dean's withdrawal from life became increasingly complete following the failed reunion tour. He rarely left his house, stopped returning phone calls, and seemed to lose interest in everything that had once mattered to him. Frank continued his visits, but they became increasingly one-sided conversations. Frank would talk about current events, mutual friends, entertainment industry news, and memories from their shared past, while Dean listened silently or sometimes seemed not to hear at all. It was like watching someone disappear while they were still physically present. Frank told close friends. Dean was dying of grief, and there was nothing anyone could do to save him. Frank tried arranging professional help, suggesting that Dean speak with therapists who specialized in grief counseling. Dean refused. Frank tried organizing family interventions, thinking that pressure from all of Dean's children might motivate him to seek help. Dean simply shut down further. The most heartbreaking aspect of Dean's decline was watching him lose his relationship with his surviving children. Dean's grief over losing Dean Jr. seemed to make him incapable of connecting with his other children, as if loving them risked experiencing the same devastating loss again. December 25, 1995, the final Christmas. Dean Martin died on Christmas Day, 1995, at the age of 78. The official cause of death was acute respiratory failure, but everyone who knew him understood that Dean had really died of a broken heart 8 years earlier. Frank was devastated by Dean's death, but he wasn't surprised. He had watched his friend slowly fade away since 1987, and he knew that Dean had never recovered from losing his son. "Dean died when his boy died," Frank said at Dean's funeral. "Everything after that was just his body catching up to what had happened to his spirit." Frank's eulogy for Dean was one of the most emotional speeches of his life. He spoke about their 40-year friendship, their shared love of music, and Dean's transformation from the coolest man in show business to a father destroyed by unimaginable loss. Dean taught me that there are some kinds of pain that friendship can't heal, Frank said, his voice breaking. I tried everything I knew to bring him back, but grief had taken him to a place where love couldn't reach, the legacy of loss. Dean Martin's decline following his son's death became one of Hollywood's most tragic examples of how grief can destroy even the strongest people. It also became a testament to the depth of Frank Sinatra's loyalty and the lengths he would go to help a friend in need. Frank's 3-year vigil at Dean's side showed a side of his character that the public rarely saw. Not the confident entertainer or powerful celebrity, but a devoted friend who understood that sometimes love means staying with someone even when you can't save them. The story illustrates the devastating impact that losing a child can have on a parent. Dean's complete withdrawal from life reflected a kind of grief that transcends normal mourning and becomes a fundamental alteration of one's ability to experience joy, connection, or hope. Frank's inability to help Dean also taught him humbling lessons about the limits of friendship and intervention. Despite his wealth, influence, and genuine devotion, Frank discovered that some forms of suffering are beyond the reach of even the most dedicated friends. The tragedy highlighted the importance of professional grief counseling and mental health support for people experiencing catastrophic loss. Dean's refusal to seek help reflected attitudes about therapy that were common among his generation, but ultimately proved destructive. Most importantly, the story serves as a reminder that grief is not something to be fixed or solved, but rather something that must be processed with time, support, and often professional guidance. Frank's expectation that his friendship alone could heal Dean's devastation was both touching and unrealistic. Today, mental health professionals recognize that the kind of complicated grief Dean experienced after losing his son requires specialized treatment, and that withdrawal from life and relationships can become life-threatening if left untreated. Frank Sinatra carried guilt about his inability to save Dean Martin for the rest of his life. But those who understood the situation recognized that Frank had done everything possible for his friend, and that his loyalty during Dean's darkest years was a profound expression of love. The story of Dean Martin's decline, and Frank's desperate attempts to save him, remains one of the most heartbreaking examples of friendship in entertainment history. A reminder that love sometimes means staying with someone through their worst pain, even when there's nothing you can do to take that pain away. If this story moved you, subscribe and hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to know that supporting friends through grief means being present even when you can't provide solutions, and that some losses change people in ways that can't be undone. Have you ever watched someone you love struggle with grief that seemed impossible to overcome? Let us know in the comments how you've learned to support people through devastating loss while accepting the limits of what friendship can accomplish.